he'll be on screen here. But when you're like talking to him, responding to him and stuff.
All right, folks, back in D.C. Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for May 7, 2019. A stunning video of Sandra Bland recording on her cell phone, obtained by WBAP in Dallas. Folks, questions. Why are we just seeing this video? And what does it reveal? Could this case be reopened? We'll break it down right here. Also, the Tennessee Speaker's aide, the chief of staff, accused of framing a civil rights activist using the N-word, has resigned, not because of race, but because of sexual text messages that have also been revealed. The young activist, Justin Clark, joins us right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Vicious verbal attacks on the mother of Botham Jean, the black man shot and killed by Dallas police officer. She will join us here with her attorney. Also, does your income determine whether or not you vote or not? We'll talk to an economist about the connection between income, voting, as well as voter suppression. So we have all of that to talk about. Plus, how black will the royal baby be? What the hell kind of question is that? Well, the folks at CNN certainly screwed that up and have been taken to task by many of us. And the Puerto Rican manager of the Boston Red Sox, he has said he is not going to attend the ceremony at the White House to recognize them as World Series champions. A number of other black and Latino players are. So the question is, what's up with the white ball players? Oh, we're going to unpack that. It's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Folks, last night in Dallas, WFAA TV Channel 8 obtained a video, which they actually showed last night, of cell phone footage of the arrest of Sandra Bland in Prairie View, Texas in 2015. Yeah, it's 2019. This video was obtained through their rigorous work 4 years. Now, authorities have been sitting on this video for 4 years. It is a video that Bland shot herself of her arrest by a Texas Department of Public Safety trooper. Up until this point, all we have had was the dash cam video of this trooper showing his interaction with Sandra Bland. This video takes us inside of the car to hear, as crystal clear, her engagement with this state trooper. Watch this.
Get out of the car now.
Why am I being apprehended? You trying to give me a ticket for the failure?
Get out of the car.
Why am I being apprehended? You just
I'm
opened
giving
my
you
car
lawful
door.
order.
You just
I'm
opened
gonna
my car
drag you
door.
out of here.
So you threatening to drag me out of my own car.
Get out of the car.
And then you
I
gonna
will
stun
light
me?
you up. Get out.
Wow.
Now.
Wow.
Get out of the
Really?
car.
For a failure to signal. You doing all of this for a
Get
failure
over
to signal.
there.
Right, yeah. Yeah, let's take this to court. Let's do
Go
it.
ahead.
For a failure to signal. Yep, for a failure to signal.
Get off the phone.
On my school.
Get off the phone.
I'm not on the phone. I have a right to
Put your
record. This
phone
is my
down.
property. This
Put
is
your
my
phone
property.
down.
Sir?
Put your phone down right now.
Now, you're hearing him say, put your phone down. Now, remember, when this actually took place, what really happened there was she was coming out of the Prairie View A&M University parking lot, and literally this Department of Public Safety trooper was engaged. He had previously was engaged with someone else, turns his car around and follows Sandra Bland the entire time, waiting for her to do something. She fails to put on a signal, but in fact, she actually was getting over because he was behind her. She thought she was getting out of his way. Now, all of a sudden, we see this video. Why is it taking 4 years? Joining us right now is Cannon Lambert, who is the attorney for the Bland family. Cannon, welcome back to Roland Martin Unfiltered. Cannon, can you hear me?
I can hear you vaguely. It's a little distant, but I can hear you.
Okay, I'm having difficulty hearing you clearly. So again, so let's see, Ken, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay, now I got you. All right, so prior to WFAA airing this video, were you or the family even aware that this video existed?
We didn't know about this video. We never saw this video until we were shown by that reporter. And I guess if you think about it from the standpoint of the importance of this video, it kind of puts things into perspective, right? From the civil perspective, it really doesn't have much import. The maximum that I could recover from the Department of DPS was $100,000. The Texas Tort Claim Act capped us at $100,000, and we got that $100,000 from them. The real import of this video, though, is that if the special prosecutors had this video and then chose not to use it, chose not to pursue the perjury charge, and chose not to actually prosecute to the fullest extent possible, there's where the dilemma comes in. There's where the trouble comes in. They told this family they were going to pursue the perjury charge and that they would prosecute that and get a resolution. They told this family they would not cut a deal. And after they told them that, they cut a deal.
Well, and first of all, when you see this video, I mean, you hear Sandra Bland sitting here saying, you want to arrest me for failure to turn on a traffic signal. You see this police officer. You see this state trooper with the attitude, engage. We know how he was trying to push her buttons, telling her to put the cigarette out. For prosecutors not to even seek an indictment against this guy, that to me is beyond shameful.
Well, you've got your finger directly on the pulse. I mean, the reality of it is that the video that was recently revealed, what it shows is that Encenia had absolutely no basis to suggest that he was in fear of his safety. And that was the thing that he was suggesting all along, that he was in fear for his safety. That's why he arrested her. That's why he pulled her out of the car and the like. This video shows that's not true. And when the special prosecutors, as I understand it, had that video and had the opportunity to present that video to the grand jury and could have prosecuted him, but chose not to, I mean, you can understand why the family has consternation about that.
You know, this is one of the things that, again, when we see these videos, but here's the problem. This is 4 years later. We just discovered, we just were made aware of video a decade after the murder of Oscar Grant. Then we can go other cases, how police and prosecutors hold on to this stuff for years, hoping the public forgets about it. That, to me, is shameful. It's shameful that WFAA had to spend all this time just to get the video. How is it that we didn't know about this 4 years ago?
Well, you remember at the front end of this case, and I know you remember it because you covered it quite a bit, which is one of the reasons why when the case got settled, you were the first person that we came to announce that. But the reality of it is that when we were trying to get the police report, that was being withheld from us. In fact, you had lawyers for DPS saying that they didn't believe that we should even get the police report. So there's always a struggle that families have in terms of accessing information so that they can understand what transpires where their loved ones are hurt. And so you would hope that that would be a more transparent process. It just isn't. That being said, in a situation like this, when you're talking about a grand jury and you're talking about special prosecutors being appointed, their job is to try and come to a conclusion as to whether or not charges should be brought, and if they are brought, prosecuted to the fullest extent. And when they don't do that, I think it belies the public trust.
Well, it is certainly, again, ridiculous that we're seeing this now 4 years later. But it goes to show you, again, the lengths that prosecutors will go to protect police officers, in this case, state troopers, and how it is difficult for citizens, especially black folks, to get fair treatment by law enforcement in this country.
I mean, we have a long way to go in this country. You know, I don't think that means we give up, we throw in the towel. We have to continue to strive, and we have to continue to hold people accountable. And I think when I look at the family, that's the thing that they do best. You know, they are absolutely dedicated to trying to hold folks accountable and try and use this as a vehicle for change. And to that extent, I celebrate them.
All right, Kenan Lambert, attorney for the Sandra Bland family. We certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Thanks a lot.
All right, folks, let's go to our panel here. Mustafa Santiago Ali, former senior advisor for the Environmental Justice and with the Environmental Protection Agency. Kelly Bethea, communication strategist, as well as Dr. Niambi Carter, Howard University Department of Political Science. Dr. Carter, I want to go to you again. You know, we see these things over and over and over again, where here we are as residents, as citizens. People are constantly told, believe the police, trust the police, yet to sit on this video for 4 years, the Oscar Grant video, we now know that one of the cops who was involved in his murder called him the N-word, and the language that was used as well. That's a decade after the fact. That, to me, is willingly covering up the evidence so the public isn't aware of the misdeeds of these cops.
Well, absolutely, Roland. And I think what it highlights more often than not is the aggressive treatment that a lot of black citizens and others get at the hands of the police. Police should be trained to de-escalate situations, but as we saw with Sandra Bland, that police officer escalated that situation for something that should have been a ticket or a fine to something where she was jailed and subsequently died in police custody. That should never have happened, not if we have a professionally well-trained police force. Now, that's the lie we've been told, but I think as evidence has shown us over and over and over again, we cannot count on police officers to treat the citizens of this country with respect and to de-escalate situations and not move to violence. It's like the only thing that they've been taught is force and having people bow to their will. And the only way to make them comply is to use violence. And when that doesn't work, we get really poor outcomes, particularly for communities of color. And I think that we haven't seen the fact that we haven't seen this video for 4 years shows the ways in which we can't trust the legal process to be full and impartial. And in fact, we have to be hyper vigilant, and we require not just the families and the legal communities that represent them, but also the journalists in this case and others to really push for opening and a full accounting of all evidence in this matter, because I have no doubt that we would have never seen this video if it were not for the journalistic community pushing forward.
Mustafa, again, we know now, in the case of Oscar Grant, the police officer instigated the shooting, lied about what took place, but we only know this because this report was released 10 years later.
This is about power. You know, it's about some in law enforcement feeling that they have the ability to sort of frame the narrative. They have the ability to push people to the limit. Sometimes they don't even have to push people to the limit. And then, you know, unfortunately, far too many folks are actually losing their lives because of this power dynamic that's going on. But it's also an interesting situation where if you or I hold back evidence, then we will find ourselves probably on the other side of the legal system, but we're allowing law enforcement officers and the associations that surround them to protect them, to hide the facts, and to sort of change the dynamics of the cases so that they are, in many instances, getting off. Where if people saw the reality when it was still raw and when it was still fresh, that the juries would probably, or even the district attorneys, would go in a different direction. We have to change that dynamic. We have to hold people accountable. And there is a price to pay when law enforcement is not doing their job properly.
Kelly, first of all, in the case of Oscar Grant, the only reason we even know about this particular report, this internal affairs investigation that was conducted by an outside law firm, is because of a new law in California dealing with police transparency. What we now know is that the officer, Anthony Perrone, struck Oscar Grant. He also used profanity and the N-word during the incident, lied to investigators saying that that Oscar Grant hit his partner and kicked him in the groin, but the video evidence completely disputes that. But we're learning this 10 years later.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. And the same thing happened with the Sandra Bland situation, in that the evidence now shows that whatever the statement that the police officer said is completely contradictory to what the video footage shows. But going to the Roots original article regarding the discovery that was produced, they said that 820 gigabytes of data was compiled and that they gave it to the opposing party, Sandra Bland's legal team. And it just feels like there's been only that they were looking for a needle in a stack of needles, as opposed to just giving this information forthright at worst, if it was actually in that 820 gigabytes worth of data. On the other hand, this is just blatantly obstruction. And the question that I would have for the legal team for Sandra Bland is there a statute of limitations on perjury or obstruction? Can we, what are the next steps further to make sure that some semblance of justice is served here?
Well, but here's the problem. The problem is Sandra Bland's the family attorneys can't bring that forth. Who has to do it? The district attorney.
Right.
In this case, and you had a special prosecutor involved in this, and that's the problem that you have here. And so the problem that we consistently see is that we're having to go to district attorneys to prosecute perjury. But they're the same very people who failed to indict the officer in the first place. And that's sort of one of the issues that we have. And so we'll certainly keep the focus on these cases and continue to push for more police transparency and law enforcement transparency in many of these cases. Let's go to our second story, folks, and that is out of Tennessee, where we talked about House Speaker Glenn Casta, his chief of staff, who tried to frame a civil rights activist sending racist and sexist texts. Well, that chief of staff is Cade Cochran. He is now resigned, but he didn't resign because of the racial text messages that he sent. He resigned because of sexual text messages that he sent to two aides, including asking for oral sex, as well as commenting on different women. He also was engaged in conversations with the Speaker of the House about other women. That Speaker of the House said, that he's not going to resign, that he is apologetic over those particular text messages that he sent. And then also the chief of staff, who's not quit, he says he was young, he was dumb, and he's such a different person these days. Well, let's actually see whether or not that's true or not. I don't believe it for a second. Joining us right now is Justin Jones, who was the activist who they tried to frame, plus his attorney, Lee Merritt, who joins us right now. Justin, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered. Say it again. Okay, folks, we apparently lost connection with Justin and his attorney, Lee Merritt. So what we will do is we will try to get them back in just 1 second here. There are a couple of the stories I want to get to. One of them deals with Botham Jean's mom. We'll talk about that story right there. So let's do this here. I'm going to go to a break. When we come back, hopefully we will have Justin and attorney Lee Merritt right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'll be back in just a moment. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. All right, folks, again, welcome back to Roland Martin Unfiltered. The Boston Red Sox, they won the World Series last year, and like winners, they have been invited to the White House to meet with President Donald Trump. But their manager, Alex Cora, he says he is not going to attend. In fact, a number of black and Latino ball players have made it clear that they are not going to be attending as well. Yet, who will be attending? White ball players of the Boston Red Sox. In fact, that was a tweet that was sent out that was interesting, where this reporter tweeted that what he said was, he said, looks like the White Sox are the only people who are going. And David Price, African-American, was a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. He retweeted that, and he said that he felt that more than 38,000 people should have given a chance to see that tweet. He then backtracked by saying, well, he felt it was insensitive. But I don't think David Price was believing it was insensitive. I think David Price was on point there. I want to go to my panel right now, and I want to start with you, Mustafa. Here's what's interesting. Again, and we've seen this in the NFL as well, where black ball players out there speaking to issues, and all of a sudden you're like, where are the white ball players? And then, of course, you had Chris Long and a few other players who actually spoke up. And you see this racial divide. In fact, Jamel Hill has a piece in The Atlantic talking about that, where she says it's wrong to keep asking the black and Latino ball players, are they going to visit the White House? She says what they should be doing is going to the white ball players and saying, why aren't y'all standing with your black and Latino ball players? Mustafa, your thoughts?
I agree with her 100%. It's time for white brothers and sisters to stand in solidarity with others, you know, who are pushing back against these injustices that they see. And, you know, it's an interesting dynamic. You know, sometimes when I'm out across the country speaking and stuff, and people will ask me about racism, how do we stop racism? And I'm very honest with them. I say that white brothers and sisters are the ones who can help to stop racism, because that's where the root of it comes from. So if you are not willing to invest, if you're not willing to stand up and say that these injustices are happening and that I do not support them, then, you know, you're kind of connected to it if you're not willing to, you know, stand up and push back against these types of things. So I agree with our sister 100%. And it's actually time. You know, you can't have brothers like LeBron being out there by themselves, or Seth Curry, or a number of the others who are out there. It's time for folks to actually, let's take account of people who actually want to make a change against racism.
Dr. Carter, a month ago, Kyle Korver, of course, white guard in the NBA, published this essay in the Players Tribune, which was called "Privileged." And this is what he wrote. He said, "When the police break your teammate's leg, you'd think it would wake you up a little. When they arrest him on a New York street, throw him in jail for the night, and leave him with a season-ending injury, you would think it would sink in. You would think you would know there was more to the story. You'd think, but nope." He writes, "I still remember my reaction when I first heard what happened to Thabo. It was 2015, late in the season. Thabo and I were teammates on the Atlanta Hawks, and we'd flown into New York late after a game in Atlanta. When I woke up the next morning, our team group text was going nuts. Details were still hazy, but guys were saying Thabo hurt his leg. During an arrest? Wait, he spent the night in jail? Everyone was pretty upset and confused. Well, almost everyone. My response was different. I'm embarrassed to admit it." And this got lots of attention. Of course, white conservatives were really criticizing Kyle Korver. But Dr. Carter, what he lays out is a perfect example. Here he is with a black teammate who had his leg was broken by NYPD. He was not in the wrong. And this white ball player pretty much ain't my problem.
Yeah.
That speaks to the same thing with these white ball players who are very easy. Oh, no, you know, we're going to go to the White House with Trump. Not speaking out against the bigotry of Donald Trump.
Well, and I mean, I think this is just a microcosm of the larger world we live in, where you see people of color, black folks, Latino folks, Native Americans on the front lines of all kinds of social justice movements, and then having to kind of pull white folks along if they're willing to be led that way. And I think, you know, this is one of those moments, as Mustafa rightly pointed out, where you have to kind of let white people do this work in their own communities and speak back to these team owners. Where was the concern for Thabo? I mean, his career could have been over. I mean, when you make your money with your body, that could be devastating. And it was, certainly. But I think, you know, more than that, I think this speaks to the larger societal issues that we have, where whites see their cause as very separate from the cause of black people and the cause of others. And it's not to say all white people at all times. At the same time, black people and Latino folks and others can't be the only ones with skin in the game. We can't be the only ones losing things, putting endorsements on the line, or just putting our real freedoms on the line. As you rightly point out, I mean, people are going out here protesting and being arrested and having their lives upended, trying to do the right thing and trying to seek justice for the most of us, right? And so it's sort of one of these things where, you know, you want to say to others like Kyle Korver, you know, getting the benefits with none of the burdens isn't the way to build a team. And if we really mean that we are a team and that we're, you know, all for one and one for all, it can't just be on the court. It also has to be off the court, because ultimately what hurts my teammate, what hurts my fellow citizen, also hurts me. And I don't think that ethos has sort of seeped out in the larger society. And so we shouldn't expect to see it in the NFL, the MLB, the NBA, or any other place where these kind of injustices are replicated, because they're institutional and they're endemic to the country that we live in. And if it's looked like racism is only a black problem, then of course nobody else feels like they need to do any work.
Kelly, one of the things that when we think about the history of this country, you go back to the 60s, there's a black freedom movement, when you had white students who went down south, and you often had black activists who took offense by saying, look, if anything happens to any one of these white kids, the FBI is going to swoop down here in a heartbeat, and they don't give a damn about any of us. When we also think about what happens today, I mean, I've heard numerous African Americans actually say this, and that is, when something happens to somebody white, now all of a sudden we can now get some attention to a cause. And I think I think back to also Malcolm X. He wrote in his autobiography of Malcolm X, where he talked about a white student, I believe, at Harvard or one of the Ivy League schools, came up to him and asked him, how could I help you with your cause? And Malcolm X said nothing and walked away. Later, he wrote that he said he wishes he had told her, look, I don't need you helping black folks. I need you going back to your white enclaves and dealing with them when it comes to race. It's the same thing, I think, with these ball players. And we now know that even when it came to Colin Kaepernick, Baltimore Ravens talked about it. You had many of these white conservative ball players who were pissed off, and they did exactly what Kyle Korver did. Kyle Korver writes that his first thought was, quote, what was Thabo doing out at a club on a back-to-back? Not how is he doing, not what happened during the arrest, why was he out? The white ball players did the same thing. Why can't you guys just comply? That's how white folks think when things happen to black people. Not what if they do wrong, essentially, hey, black person, what the hell were you doing? Kelly.
I think that it's a situation where, especially now, racism has never been our burden, but it has been burdensome to us. And now we are in a dynamic where we can actually say, hey, this is not our burden to bear. This is your responsibility to fix, or rather, at least share the responsibility in fixing it at this point, especially in sports world, because you have so many ethnicities, so many races actually working together for the sake of the team. But when it comes to things outside of the team, that's when everybody's isolated. That's when everybody is their own person. Everybody's an individual. You need to take that teamwork outside of the sport itself and actually get something done beneficial to the whole. But in this case, people of color, black people, because it's burdensome to us, but again, it's not our burden to actually fix.
All right then, folks, let's go back to the story we were talking about out of Tennessee. Well, the Chief of Staff to the Speaker of the House, Cade Cothran, has resigned, not because he used the N-word in text messages, not because he was trying to frame a black activist, a student at Vanderbilt University who was protesting policies there, but because of sexual text messages, sending messages to a couple of interns. Joining us right now is Justin Jones, that activist there in Tennessee. Justin, welcome to Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hey, Ms. Martin, thank you for having me.
So what are your thoughts about this white guy in Tennessee resigning, not because he tried to frame you, not because he used the N-word, but because he actually sent sexually sexual messages to a couple of interns?
I think, the large part of the story that is ongoing here from folks here on the ground is that he has resigned, and yet the person who empowered him, the person who gave him that $200,000 salary, the person who promoted him to this position, despite knowing this sort of lewd behavior, this criminal, this racist behavior, is the Speaker of the House, who today has refused to resign. And so we know Brother Cawthorn has resigned today, and yet we know that the fight continues because we have people in power who've created this culture that allows that to go unchallenged. And so we're hoping that folks will continue to put pressure on Speaker Cassada to resign, and our own governor, Bill Lee, to call a special session of the state legislature, which just adjourned last week, so that he can resign, and as well as Majority Leader William Lamberth.
Well, what it also shows the complete impotence of Republicans for not standing up and saying the Speaker of the House, it's time for him to go.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is that, this issue is really a moral issue of right or wrong. What we're seeing today, you saw the Black Caucus here in Tennessee call for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to investigate these text messages, to investigate these emails, these fraudulent emails. And you have members who've chosen silence. You have those who are so loud usually throughout the legislative session, and yet our governor, when asked, to make a substantive statement as to what he will do next, has chosen to be quiet and to make very general statements that we believe in certain types of behavior should be permitted, yet he who has the power to do something has chosen not to. And so that's our big concern here, is that this is beyond Republican and Democrat. What we're seeing is extremists. You have someone calling people the N-word. You have someone joking about what they want to do to interns, to these young women. You have people who create fraudulent emails and who have no accountability. And I think the most important thing is we cannot separate this from the policies that were passed this legislative session that attack women, that attack people of color, that attack Black and brown communities trying to register to vote here in Tennessee. You cannot separate this from the fact that we still have a KKK statue of the first Grand Wizard of the KKK, a Confederate general, in our state capitol. And yet you have a man who says that Black people are N-words, that we're thugs, that we're ignorant. And now we see that those statements are reflected in decisions that have real policy and decision-making implications.
Justin, first of all, what is the latest with your case? Has everything been cleared up, or are you still having to deal with them believing that you were targeting the Speaker of the House?
Well, I still have, a special prosecutor is being appointed to the case, and so we're going to have to wait to see who that is and to see what they choose to do. And yet we hope that the special prosecutor will also look at, these emails and look at this behavior that is criminal to create fraudulent emails, to submit them as evidence to revoke bond, and to really try and take my freedom away. And so we hope that whoever's the special prosecutor who's going to be appointed, we are appreciative that the DA has finally decided to step down and allow someone who's independent to look into this, because we've been bringing this issue up for 2 months now. Since this happened, we've been letting people know that this happened, and it was not until this special reporter, this investigative reporter from Channel 5, actually looked into it that people start paying attention to these claims. And so we hope that this will continue. And as you see, this has opened up, this has unveiled a much deeper level of evil and of abuse happening in our state legislature. And so we hope that we continue to allow the light of truth to shine on what has happened with lies. But we know, as Monty said, that sometimes, a lie can get out there with its running shoes on, but it takes the truth a while to walk its way too. And so we know that this is going to be a very slow process, but we do believe in urgency, that what's happening now, that the Speaker should today submit his resignation because he is not fit to represent the people of Tennessee.
All right, Justin Jones, we appreciate it, man. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, folks. So we're covering the story of Botham Jean, the black man in Dallas who was shot and killed by a Dallas police officer. She claims that she thought she was in her apartment, which took place on a different floor, when in fact she was actually in the apartment of Botham Jean. Well, Chris Krok is the host of a radio talk show on conservative radio station WBAP in Dallas. I lived there a number of years and quite familiar with it. This idiot, Chris Krok, did an entire segment devoting to trashing Botham Jean's mother. Right. Mother. Now, Amber Geiger was the cop who shot and killed Botham Jean. So Krok has an issue with Botham Jean's mother speaking out on the issue. So listen to what he actually had to say. The first voice you're going to hear is Allison Jean, Botham Jean's mother. Then you're going to hear Chris Krok and his nonsense. Check this out.
She said nothing to suggest that he was armed and that she sought to disarm him, or he rushed towards her, or he charged her.
She said nothing about Botham being armed, rushing towards her, charging her. You know, this mother is not an authentic mother, honestly telling you her thoughts. She's telling you, she's reading a script of what her attorney said yesterday. Listen closely.
The only thing I heard her saying was, I thought I was in my apartment.
I thought it was my apartment.
That's it. Nothing else. Nothing Botham's charging at me. Nothing I thought he had a gun.
Yeah, exact same word. Botham's charging at me. He had a gun. What did she say again? Let's hear. What did Mom say?
She said nothing to suggest that he was armed and that she sought to disarm him, or he rushed towards her, or he charged her.
Ah, charging. The same thing your attorney said yesterday. A grieving mom or a scheming mom? And here's my contention right now on Botham Jean's mom. She's filled with bitterness and hatred. Botham Jean's mother is either being lied to and has been lied to by her race pimp attorney. She's got several race pimp attorneys. Or she's lying to us, scheming because she wants to make money off of this, or because she wants to nail this woman, Amber Guyger, to a cross in any way she can. And Amber Guyger is not a cold-blooded murderer as she wants us to believe. It's actually so sad that Amber Guyger, that Botham Jean's mom, Allison, actually says this woman has every attribute of a murderer. But she's going to cause a riot in a city that wouldn't riot, because she's going to be doing the same crap. When there's a not guilty verdict, and there will be a not guilty verdict by mistake of fact, when that happens, this woman who says that Guyger has every attribute of a murderer, she's going to scream. She's going to say with that drug dealing pimp husband of what's his name in Ferguson, Michael Brown, who tried to murder the cop and who committed strong arm robbery when he was high, and then was shot and killed. Remember his father-in-law, his stepfather, who's a jailbird, always in and out of jail, dealing drugs and stuff. He yelled, "Burn this MFer down." Do you remember that? In St. Louis and Ferguson, Missouri, when the Hussein Obama black African-American Hussein Obama Justice Department said there's nothing here to charge the cop with, Michael Brown tried to kill the cop. You know, he yelled, "Burn this MFer down." Right? That's basically, without saying burn this MFer down, what Botham Jean's mom is doing. So she's seeking revenge, vindictiveness, and to destroy Amber Guyger. When what this really was and what this really is a horrible and sad confluence of events. And for some reason, God took Botham away. It was his time. And for some reason, God chose to use Amber Guyger to do that.
Let me go to my panel. Mustafa, to listen to this racist. First of all, let me unpack this. Mm-hmm. WBAP is a white conservative radio station in Dallas, Fort Worth. Listen to his language. Race pimp lawyers. He attacks Botham Jean's mother. She's the one whose son is dead. God used Amber Guyger, and then he's like, oh, this confluence of events. A guy is dead because of her actions. And then, the mom is going to cause a race riot in Dallas. This is the kind of nonsense that is allowed by these white conservative talk radio show hosts who don't give a damn about black lives. This is why Black Lives Matter. And when you have racists like this, and I very rarely use the word racist, but when you listen to the language of this bigot, of what he said in that 3-minute and 17-second clip, that's all you need to understand about the kind of person this idiot is.
You know, this is from the old playbook, where they dehumanize, delegitimize the individuals who, in many instances, are the ones who are being impacted, the ones who have been victims of violence. So this has been going on, for hundreds of years, unfortunately, in this country. This goes back to a previous conversation that we were having. So for those folks who say they are people of faith, for those who say that they believe in morality and humanity, all these various things that we sort of share, that who we are as Americans, it is time for folks to utilize their dollars when you have these types of individuals having these shows, and making sure that you let their sponsors know that you will no longer support this show if these types of individuals continue to sort of share this rhetoric. And we have power, but folks have to sort of actually show up, like we said earlier, and stop this type of thing and make sure that people understand that you are no longer going to support this type of behavior, either through listening or through the utilization of your dollars.
Dr. Carter, again, I'm listening to these words. Michael Brown wanted to kill the officer in Ferguson. Oh, his stepdad, drug dealer. Yep. Again, the attorneys, race pimps. Mm-hmm. The mom, she's not grieving. All she wants is $1. Mm-hmm. When she's the one whose son is dead and Amber Geiger is still alive.
Well, I mean, that whole screed was about exonerating Amber Geiger. Like you said, a confluence of things. God used her. This had nothing to do with God and everything to do with this woman discharging her weapon in a home that was not her own. And Mr. John and his mother, by extension, become the collateral damage that just sort of happens and it falls out of the sky. And this is the kind of hypocrisy, I think, that Republicans are going to have to contend with in November, but also that we have to contend with right now, because as Mr. Jones said in a previous segment, and as we said before, all of this stuff is connected and it is related. These things are not these disconnected or disparate moments of racism. The reason he says those things is because we know this American playbook, which is when in doubt, blame the dead person, because dead men tell no tales. So Mr. John is dead and the only person left is Amber Geiger, and of course it's a small white woman, so she should get our sympathies, at least as far as this Krok person is saying on his show. And then, black mothers can't feel anything for their children. Black parents shouldn't be rightfully outraged at the fact that their children are dead for really no reason. This man was in his home. There's no place that he should have been safer, but he is dead, and it's really hard to contain the level of anger and the level of just rage. And I think that is a legitimate emotion for people to feel when you have to listen to nonsense like this, and you have to listen to people tell you that you shouldn't feel all the things that you feel at the loss of life and the damage that is done to communities when things like this happen, because they don't just happen in a vacuum. They happen in a social and political context. And we know this all too well. Black people don't need an investigation to know that something bad happened, and that it happened over and over again. It's been happening for decades. It's been happening for hundreds of years. It's been happening since this country has been a country. And so when we talk to people like Chris Krok, and we can't have a conversation with people like that because they're not interested in what is the truth. They don't care about God, despite what they say. They don't care about conservatism, despite what they say. They don't care about anything but the ideology of white supremacy. And that, unfortunately, leaves black people, Latino people, and others dead in the street on a far too regular basis, either from environmental conditions, from police officers' bullets, from just the sort of economic weight and disparities that exist in this country. And I'm sorry, this was beyond the pale of disgusting.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, when you listen to those attacks, this is the messaging that white conservatives are getting every day. Not that she was wrong, not that she should be held accountable, but, black folks, it's y'all problem. He essentially was saying, Botham Jean, you the reason you're dead. Not the fact that you're in your own apartment and that she was wrong, but you're dead because of you.
No, absolutely. And if there's anything that a racist white man has, it is the audacity and the unmitigated gall to blame somebody who is dead, to blame black people for black people problems, when it's really, in this case, a white person's blame to bear. And I remember this case specifically because the apartment itself was by fob, and there was virtually no way to get into that apartment on your fob if you did not live there. So his notion that this is going to be a mistake of fact and that she's going to be exonerated and all of these things, I beg to differ. Again, the trial hasn't necessarily happened yet, but he's already lying through his teeth. And again, he just had the audacity to go so far as to blame a grieving mother for wanting justice for her son. And I'm pretty sure that in the case of, Noor, I believe his name is, in Minneapolis, who just got jailed for killing a white woman under very similar circumstances. That family was awarded $20 million, and he's having the unmitigated gall to say that this black woman is seeking damages on behalf of her son. I sincerely doubt that she would get $1, let alone $20 million, because of this case, if what's going to happen by way of her being exonerated is going to happen. She's not going to see anything. It's highly doubtful anyway. So either way, he's absolutely disgusting.
And the only thing he might have gotten right is that she's likely to be exonerated.
Right. And that's the sad part.
Well, again, absolutely. All right, folks, let's go to our next story. And that is, it deals with the issue of voting. You would think the people who struggle with economic hardship would be more likely to get involved in their political process. But studies have shown that that's not necessarily the case. And that leads, of course, a vicious cycle. Poor folks not voting, politicians who don't represent their interest are elected, and they then make it even harder for poor people to vote. Let's talk about this with our next guest. She is economist Dr. Kristen Brody of Alabama A&M University. Dr. Brody, this was quite an interesting piece here where you break down that the people who are most impacted by public policy, who are poor folks, are the ones who are not going to the polls in the numbers that they should.
Absolutely, Roland. Thank you so much for having me. Voting really is about a couple of things: political interest, motivation, and ability. But when you're trying to figure out who's going to take care of your children, how you're going to get to work, what you're going to put on the table for dinner, you don't really have the wherewithal to get involved in voting. The opportunity cost is just too high. And if we can convince you to get involved, there's still the ability. How do you get there? How do you get to the polls? And once you do get there, there's a long line, and you get to the front of the line, and they tell you that you don't have the right ID, that you're not on the list, that you're at the wrong place, or you get there and the place that they told you to come to is closed. So you made the sacrifice to come and vote, and now you can't. You're unlikely to make that sacrifice again.
Well, and this is also why I keep trying to explain to folks that we have to understand why voter suppression, why Republicans are doing all they can, because they want to frustrate people. They want to make it more difficult, and they don't want folks who are poor, who are working, who are trying to improve their lives. They don't want them going to the polls because that's why they precisely don't talk about them. They don't talk about, no one talks about the poor. They talk about the middle class, the middle class, the middle class, the middle class. You swear that the only classes that exist in America is the middle class and the rich people.
Right, and if people knew how important voting was, then they would get to the polls, right? If we could convince them, if we could make a way for them to get there, if we could have buses to take them, if we could have voter registration, but they're shutting all of that down. They're saying that you can't take buses of elderly people to vote. They're saying that you can't have these various voter registration drives. So if you prevent people from understanding how important voting is, then they won't vote. And when politicians look at who's voting for them, if it's not poor people, then why are they going to go and listen to some people or cater to some people that aren't voting in the first place? That's the whole paradox. Keeping the poor people, especially African Americans, out of the voting process, keeping them from being able to vote to change their situation.
Dr. Carter, this is one of the reasons why I often talk about having to connect the dots, where you have to have folks who are having very direct conversations with poor people and saying, let me explain to you how the person who is in office, whether you voted or not, how that has a direct impact on your economic well-being.
Well, I think I think people know that intrinsically. They just don't know how it matters.
Actually,
right?
no, actually, they don't.
No,
to be perfectly honest with you, they don't.
Okay,
I traveled this
I'm just
country,
a political
Doc, I'll be real
scientist who
honest
actually
with you.
does this. But I'm saying that I may not know the specifics.
Let me ask you then. Well, let me ask you then. So let me ask you then. I want to unpack that. Because what's interesting is when I travel this country and interviewing people in town halls, it's amazing to me how when we're having conversations, folks will say, oh, I didn't realize when I'm voting on education, I'm looking to my state rep or I'm looking to a member of Congress, and they go, I'm not voting in school board elections. Right. And I'm like, well, that's actually where you most impact on education. Or then when you talk about public policy, when you talk about roads and things along those lines, I've had folks say, oh, I thought I was talking to my member of Congress, but really, roads is my county government.
Well, absolutely. I'm not saying that there's not an education gap, right? That people don't need to know the difference between state, local, and federal distinctions. But to say that people have no sensibility that these things actually matter to their lives, they do know that. Because when you are seeing things like in the last 4 years, rolling back the number of places you can poll, right, or vote places you can vote, rolling back your opportunities to vote early, right, because time and money are most valuable resources that people can have when we're talking about voting, whether it's gathering information or taking the time. And since it's not a holiday, people don't actually have a lot of time, and a lot of employers don't give people paid leave to go actually go vote. So people know that these things are happening. We saw what happened in Georgia. The most polling places that were closed in black districts, overwhelmingly poor districts, because these are the people who are most easily disenfranchised, and they're easily disenfranchised because they don't have lots of time or money. It's the same reason that young people are easily to dissuade from voting. We've known this for years, but we also know that there are other things that people do to counteract these forces in their lives, right? So people actually don't just sit there and say, I'm not going to do these things. They may not do all of the things, right? And I think people have this
here's what I mean by
idea.
connecting the dots.
I'm sorry?
Here's what I mean by connecting the dots. Here's what I mean by connecting the dots. I don't mean just in terms of polling locations. What I mean is like I experienced this in 2016. At a radio show, numerous folks would call in, and they would say, you know what, I'm not feeling Hillary Clinton. I don't like Donald Trump. And you know what, I'm just going to focus on my state. Okay, so I'm having this conversation. And I remember it was specifically with a sister in North Carolina. And I said, okay, what are the top 5 issues in your state? And she said, well, one of the things I'm really concerned about, to your point, is voting. And I said, okay, explain that. And then, so she told me. And I said, now, you do know the role that the president, appointments, Department of Justice, Supreme Court, Congress has on your very issue. And I would begin to go through it. So then she talked about HBCUs. And then I said, okay, you do know that the funding of HBCUs in North Carolina is not just the state legislature. It also impacts in terms of these initiatives in Congress. And we went through all 5. What was amazing is that she actually thought, and this was a college-educated sister who was a grassroots organizer, she thought she could check out of the process on the presidential level, on the senatorial level, the congressional level, and only focus on her states. And I said, no, they're all interrelated. So when I say connect the dots, what I mean is I believe there has to be more of a connecting the dots of folks to say, here's your station in life, and this is how politicians actually impact every facet of your life. And this notion that, oh, I want government out of my life is a fallacy, because government is in every aspect of your life, even if you don't think they are.
Absolutely. Nobody's disagreeing, but I think voter fatigue is real. And I think we have in our mind that citizens are the ideal citizens at all times, right? That people do their best at all times to participate in every part. And I think what's clear is that people don't have infinite reserves of energy, of time, of money. And so people do check out at different points. And it's not because they don't care. It's just Like, it's a lot. All these voting times aren't the same time. We have primaries, we have general elections, then we have school board elections, we have city council elections. They're not held at the same time of year. They're held in off years, in fact. And so we spend an inordinate amount of time talking about national elections and very little talking about state and local elections. So as you said, school boards, very important, right? But how much time do we really take up talking about those things so people do understand? I mean, we are not doing a good job in this country of raising civically minded individuals. We've actually done away with civic education, and that is in part why you see these disconnects. But it's not to say that people are bad citizens for not underlanding all of these things.
Can I just chime in, Roland?
Hold on one second. I'm going to Mustafa. I'm going to pull up Mustafa, and then I'm going to come right back to you. I'm going to bring him in for the reason because he's focused on the environmental issues. And Mustafa, that's also when I talk about how we connect the dots. How we, and again, so what I'm talking about is having a different approach to how we talk about voting. I think, Mustafa, the problem has been elections coming up. It's the most, I can hear all the phrases. This is the most important election of your life. And it was like, well, I thought that the last one was. And then the previous one was. And the previous one, where I believe that groups that are out there who are trying to mobilize and organize have to speak to voters in a different way about public policy to get them out to the polls with different numbers. Mustafa, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I share with folks around the country is that your vote equates to power, resource, and influence, and it happens on all the levels. When I talk to folks, I talk to them about the housing that's inside of their communities and how their vote can help to get better housing. And if you don't get engaged in that, then people are allowed to manipulate that process. I talk to them about the transportation routes. When you're not engaged in that process, people are going to put roads where they want to put them, and sometimes those roads will actually impact you by getting more pollution into your community. I talk to people about when you see these coal-fired power plants, incinerators, all this other stuff that's going on, it's because either we're getting engaged and utilizing our vote to get the right people in place who help to protect our communities, or we're allowing others to come in and fill that space and they're making decisions for us. And I also talk about how if you utilize your vote properly, we can get jobs back into our community. And that's through the city council, the county commission, on the state house, and on the federal level. But when we don't get engaged in that process, then others are making decisions for us. And usually when you frame it like that, most people don't want somebody else making a decision for them. And the other dynamic is, and you know, I just have to share this, we can't have voter fatigue. I get that. And I understand, you know, how people are working hard to put food on the table and pay the mortgage. But in many instances, we're only voting, say in a 4-year cycle, maybe 4 times, 5 times. So we spend a whole lot of time watching ball games. You know, you'll spend hours watching your favorite team. You'll spend hours standing in line to get into your favorite club or whatever it might be. So we make the time for the things that matter, but we have to make sure that our vote is actually tied to the real things that are happening in people's lives with real people who are running for office. And if you can't find somebody, you should run yourself, whether it's on the city level, the county level, or on the state level. And that's how we change this dynamic.
Kristen, go ahead.
I just wanted to agree with Dr. Carter and Mustafa that we can't have voter fatigue. We do need the information, but who did a good job was the Russians, and that's something that the State of Black America focused on. They put out all of these various things saying that they were Black Lives Matter activists. In fact, there were a number of posts that said that you could vote online. They looked real. Vote for Hillary Clinton just by clicking on this link or texting this number. It looked real. It had a real Black person's face, somebody who was supposed to be an activist. So who knows how many people believed that they were voting when they texted that number or when they clicked on that link. That's what we're combating.
Well, Christian, that's also why, though, I'm a firm believer in getting folks to say, don't just follow anybody who call themselves an activist. Actually know who the hell they are. So if you've never actually seen them on Black shows, radio or television, or in Black media outlets, my suggestion, don't listen to them because they're likely fake. Kelly, I want to bring you in here. And the reason I've really, for the last several years, I've been stuck on this whole idea of how do we connect the dots, because look, I've gone out with different voter groups, NAACP, Black Voters Matter, with rallies and things along those lines. And again, spent a lot of time talking to folks on the ground. But I go back to the Black Freedom Movement. I go back to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the citizenship education training programs they had. I go back to the freedom schools. I go back, so to Dr. Carter's point, the lack of focus on civics in our education process, to me, that's where we say, okay, since y'all not doing it, we are going to go back to grassroots to be able to connect those dots. So when you look at what Dr. Brody talked about in her column, the lower you go with the income, less likely folks are able to vote. If we are again educating our folks in a different way, and again being able to connect the dots, and the reason this thing is so personal to me because my parents were co-founders of a civic club where I grew up in Houston. And my mom eventually rose to become the co-chair of the Metropolitan Organization, which was a coalition of faith-based churches and others. And they would often, with City Hall, they held mayoral forums, they would go to the state legislature. But what I personally witnessed as they were walking poor people through this policy, how it impacts you. This housing development, how it impacts you. And they got soaked to the ground, or as Joe Madison say, put it where the goats can get it, as opposed to we always have these sort of high-level conversations. And so that's what I mean, Kelly, by, I think, looking at 2020 in a different way on how we connect the dots to Black voters. Go ahead.
No, we absolutely need to connect the dots a little better. Your notion of this higher level of vocabulary kind of eluding people, that's definitely a thing. But when you're talking about, when you were saying in your memories regarding freedom schools and the like, the reasons why they worked so well outside of the content therein is because that was the only way you were getting that message. Right now we have to combat social media, the internet, other people, Russians, and anything and everything else therein. So it's not just coming from one person that you can trust. It's coming from 5 people that you look like you can trust. And that's the problem. So your idea of actually going straight to grassroots is an excellent idea, especially in lower income communities where there's still the inaccess to the internet is still a thing. You can definitely use that tactic there, but I also think you need to revamp the strategy a little bit outside of tradition because we now have another entity involved.
Oh no. And when I say grassroots, I'm not saying you only go to local Christian. I'm not saying you only go to on the ground. What I'm saying is you use all the available tools. Because I think you have to redefine the conversation. I think you have to explain it in a different way. So, perfect example, and this is going to be the last round for each one of you. I want you to comment. On Fox News, Richard Fowler was on, and they were talking about Trump reaching Black voters. And he's a Fox News contributor. He's African American. And so Harris Faulkner threw out there, well, what about, Trump signing the prison reform bill? And then I had a guy send me a tweet saying, hey, Trump has actually spent more money on HBCUs than President Barack Obama did. And so I replied to the guy, I said, well, first of all, I said there are multiple categories that HBCUs look at when it comes to funding. And so he was looking at this one source of funding. It was around $350 or $90 million. I said, but brother, but if you over here and you're cutting Pell Grants, I said, and 90% of HBCU's budgets are coming from students on financial aid. I said, that's actually a cut to HBCUs. I said, so you over here touting the $390 million. I'm over here looking at the billion that is being lost, but you're touting that. And I think as we're walking these things through, I think how we explain to people a policy. So, for instance, Trump gets, and look, First Step Act, great. But the fact of the matter is this. On the federal level, there are 200-some-odd-thousand people in federal prison. There are 2 million in state prisons. And so when Trump is touting, oh, I signed the First Step Act. Okay, got it. But the greatest impact on prisons on the state level And when you have a Department of Justice that wants to prosecute people at the highest level, when they don't want to have any oversight of police departments, when they have not filed a single action against all these crazy cops out here, then actually your policies are against black folks as opposed to supporting them. And I think walking people through and using every asset we have in order to get our folks to see politics differently than just Biden or Harris or this person and say, no, this is how these policies will impact you and your pocketbook and your children and your children's children. So let me go to each one of you to close the show out. Christian Brody, I'm going to start with you first. Go.
It's so interesting that you would say that. Representative Hakeem Jeffries was just at the State of Black America talking about the issue of incarceration and how there are 2.2 million people in prison and how there's no difference medically, chemically between crack cocaine and powder, right? But more African Americans end up going to jail for crack. So yeah, we need to do a better job of educating our own people about the policies that affect them, including Pell Grants, including funding for HBCUs, including voting. Because if we don't educate each other, especially with shows like this one, Roland, and thank you so much for this opportunity again, we need more shows like this, more information like this, because if we don't educate each other, the Republicans, the Russians, and others who definitely are not for us will do it.
Kelly, final comment.
No, I just agree with my panel here. Again, in terms of a communication strategy, you just have to take into consideration the new of what's going on, the new internet, the new social media, because the social media of 2020 is completely different from the social media of 2012, which is completely different from the social media of 2008, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to take everything into consideration, and you also just kind of have to get back to basics. There is nothing more impactful when it comes to voting and voting registration than face-to-face conversation and knocking on those doors. And even though it's laborious and tedious and all of those things, that's where the vote is. It's in the home. It's at the car when you put the flyer on the windshield. It's the human interaction. So for those who are, running for office or helping somebody run for office, keep that in mind, because even though you may not want to, it's definitely going to be the most beneficial to your campaign or your cause or your policy that you're trying to push.
Dr. Carter?
So I agree with everything my fellow panelists said. I think part of the notion we have to do is demystifying this process, right? In part about how do people run for office, what kind of offices are available to you, and showing people how they can actually do that, particularly at the local level, because there are lots of positions, some of which not even things you have to campaign for. I mean, and let's be real, money is part of campaigns, but there are things you actually can do to have an effect on your community. And I think we have to start also talking about what our interests are again. I think that conversation got lost a little bit, but what are black interests? And this is not partisan, but this is about what is better for your community. And if it just so happens one party has more of it than others, that's just what it is. But part of this is understanding what are black interests and how are we defining those going forward. Because when we see those kids being detained by this same federal government, then we know that has implications for the way that our children are tracked from prison, from school to prison, right? And so we have to think about the sort of enlarging sort of what our universe is, and also being more discerning about what we allow in terms of information, because even some people who look like us were saying things at last election like, we can afford to lose one. This is not going to be a big issue, but we see how deathly wrong
they still
that
saying
was. And we'll say it till the day. That doesn't make them wrong though, right? And make them right. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't call it out when we see it and say, you know what, you actually did us a disservice with that statement.
Mustafa.
I just use simple country boy knowledge. It's real simple. If your policy or your platform is not going to improve my health, my wealth, or help to protect my life, you can't get my vote.
Well, my final comment on this is very simple. First of all, one of the reasons we use this show to walk folks through is so people understand how their daily lives are impacted by public policy. The amount of time I have spent, an inordinate amount of time, a city hall reporter, county government reporter, covering multiple city halls in Fort Worth, in Dallas, in Houston, in Chicago, all these years interviewing politicians, And the one thing that I have seen, and that is this here, the politician that is most effective about conveying a very basic and clear message to different groups of voters, that's who always wins. But I believe as African Americans, we can't look to politicians to craft messages that are going to get our people to vote. I fundamentally believe that we have to be the ones who are communicating in our homes, to our family members, then to our neighbors, then to folks on our street, then to folks on our block, then to folks in our neighborhood, then our city, then our state, then the country, utilizing churches and fraternities and walking people through the most basic thing is, and that's say, what's the number one thing you're concerned about? What's the number one issue that you care about? And then say, this is how this person who's running has an impact on that issue you're talking about. And what I've seen people go, I never realized that this person had an impact on this issue. I thought it had nothing to do with it. That is critically important. So, and we can't wait. 2020 is next year. This has to be happening right now because it is so critical. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. If you want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered, please go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com to join our Bring the Funk fan club. We certainly appreciate all that you do. And so I got to go. Literally, I landed, came straight to the house to do the show from the George Lopez Golf Tournament. Thank you to Avis Jones-Weaver for having our headlines on the show yesterday. All right, folks, I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great time. Holla! You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.
Martin.